Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He personally offers and leads all of his public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout Massachusetts himself. Currently, the communities that he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we will be discussing the American Pad and Paper Company, located in the community of Holyoke, Massachusetts. So, what does the American Pad and Paper Mill make?
All right, we're going to talk about this great company, and a lot of people around Holyoke remember it because it lasted for an incredibly long time. And so we'll talk about what they made, and where they were located, and how they made production, and some of the long history of AMPAD. The key is it still exists. You can go to their webpage. They're not in Holyoke anymore. They're around the Midwest, but they still exist. So because they change with the times, they exist, and that's what they always done. Now, what did they make? Well, pads and papers. But how did they make them? They made them out of scraps of old-time paper that no one wanted. This person, Thomas Hawley, would go around, collect the scraps, and make them. And so he would make incredible products out of this little bit. So I'll give you a line of what he made. He made columnar pads, typewriter papers, stenographers' notebooks, block pads, writing tablets, composition book, notebooks, drawing tablets. He also made machine rolls, especially for atom machines. They made quadrille roll paper, cross-section papers, shorthand books, telephone pads, petty cash pads, legal rule pads, loose leaf fillers, and folder papers. They had their own lines called the Efficiency Line and the Champion Line, and they made it for offices, institutions, commercial ventures, school ventures, so forth and so on. And they changed constantly with the times to make sure they had great products for whomever wanted what.
And where were they located in Holyoke?
Now, if I just talk about the locations where their main building was, they were in 3 locations through the years. If I talk about buildings that they added along the way, but weren't their main buildings, there was 2 more buildings. So they were in 5 places in Holyoke. And they started off at the very beginning of Main Street. There was the Whiting Street building, and they started in there as a tiny little building. That building still exists, and they moved about 100 feet upwards to the north on the same side of the street, Main Street, into another building, and there they succeeded some more. So they started at 60 to 62 Main Street. They moved to 28 to 44 Main Street, and all those buildings still exist for the most part. The last one was a much larger building. Part is gone. And then they moved to the northeast corner of Appleton and Winter Street. That building is still there. I think it's 3 floors. And then they opened up a section right at the northwest corner of the same intersection, Appleton and Winter Streets, where there's a modern building, which now is where Conklin Furniture is. And so they had 2 buildings side by side on Winter Street. And they also opened up a storehouse, a production house, where the Berkshire Yarn Company was. And that was enormous. So they were getting very, very successful. And this was one of the most popular companies around the world, in the country, and in Holyoke. Lots of people know people that work there, have summer jobs there, or full-time jobs there.
And quickly, before we continue with our interview, just to fill our listeners in, For more information or to sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each tour, as well as photos and text of the historical sites as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, how was production handled at the mills?
Production was handled differently at every one of the mills they had along the way. And for instance, I'll talk about the first one, the first little tiny mill they had on Main Street. It was only a 2-floor building towards the back and a little bit higher, 3 floors towards the front. And there they would section it off, and remember, they're piecing scraps of paper together to make pads. And so they didn't have to produce anything, right? So they were a simple production. And that's key. They didn't need much space in the beginning to get it going. And they just had to get staples and staple together different colors of paper, and that's all they did. Now, when they got bigger, even by the late 1880s, they were already getting bigger, and they moved a little bit closer up Main Street. They moved into a 4-story building, and there they had the different sections for different things. Their administration was on the 2nd and 3rd floor. Their production, or what was called production, was on the 1st floor, including some storage on the 4th floor. And, of course, they changed with the times. In 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, they moved off to their place at the northeast corner of Winter Street and Appleton Street. And there they had a 4-story building that, again, they were taking material from other companies and piecing it back together. So sure, they had had some kind of production line, get this color onto this, get these lines onto this. But the paper was made other places by other mills. They never made paper. And so most of their building space was just getting things hooked together into a unit and selling this big mass of similar items. And so that's all they ever did. But they were so efficient at it that they still exist.
And tell us about the history of AMPAD.
All right, Thomas Hawley in 1884 came up with this idea that he was working for a paper mill, and he said, wow, there's so much paper, scrap paper being wasted. Why don't I get this together, cut it up the dimensions I need, put lines, put color on it, and start up a business. AMPAD, or American Pad and Paper. And it worked. And he became a very successful businessman. He didn't have to pulp up paper from tree pulp or from cotton. Other people were doing that around Holyoke. He just got their waste product, cut. He had lots of cutters, colored it. He had lots of colored people and lined it. And that's it. And then sold it across the country as school pads or legal pads. If you remember the bigger yellow-sized legal pads you might have looked at when you were a teenager, you said, wow, these are cool. That was probably made by AMPAD, or American Pad and Paper. And they're still around. They got absorbed in the bigger company, but their name still exists. They're somewhere out in the Midwest. They left Holyoke in the year 2005. People might remember them for the 2 buildings that were never their administration centers, and that was where Conklin Furniture was at the northwest corner of Winter Street in Appleton, and for a big, gigantic sign that used to be on the Berkshire Yarn Company up on Franklin Street near the First Level Canal, where their sign was maybe 30 feet high on the top of a 5-story building, and everyone could see it. I remember as a teenager seeing that. I said, wow, that's a cool company. Little did I know they weren't a true paper company. They were a reuser of papers.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and your historical topics of your expertise. And thank you to our sponsors. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in with us. And Be sure to check out a large selection of our other podcasts at its website, and as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. So thank you, and hope you join us again tomorrow.